Check out the premise. I'll be right back.
I just learned that autistic people perceive a large vocabulary as condescension from autistic people. You incorrectly assume that that means I'm placing myself here in the pecking order and you are down here.
Dealing with holistics gets remarkably easier once you realize that they are actually always evaluating your place on the social ladder and are especially sensitive to people that are trying to climb it that don't have the social authority to do so. Now, here's the rub. When you are not explicitly neurodivergent, you're some level of successfully masking, then things get complicated for you. And I'll be depicting that with this graph. On the vertical axis is the acceptance you will have within allistic spheres. Whereas on the horizontal axis is your ability to mask to their satisfaction. Not necessarily to your interpretation, but to their satisfaction. And you're going to see something familiar in this graph from animation, and that is the uncanny valley, where many neurodivergents sit. It is deep and it is wide for the allistics, and it is very, very hard to figure out where you're at until you get the right feedback. When you reach an appropriate level of masking or you're simply allistic, then you are in the band of acceptance. They clearly see you as one of their own and they don't have much issue with you. This is a very hard place for neurodivergence to attain. So most get here to the high masking position where they are just coming out of the uncanny valley. Now, as with everything on a spectrum, on the far left side here, we've got the people that are clearly neurodivergent. These are the ones that are like exhibiting the classic behaviors that you see maybe hammed up in media or like described in the DSM. And this isn't an acceptance as equals graph, simply just like a tolerance for them. This is kind of the pity zone for neurodivergence. Now, right before you dip into Uncanny Valley, this is where like the Sheldons of the world live. Everybody recognizes that you are like clearly autistic or something else. However, you've got something about you that brings value either socially or professionally to a situation. This is like the hyper intelligent person that's like socially awkward. The Sheldons and the Abeds of the world live here. But as is the curse for most neurodivergents, we live in Uncanny Valley, where you mask successfully enough that you aren't dismissed outright as just a strange person, but you are not quite to the point where they see you as one of their own. And at the bottom here are various categories of masking. And as you can see, they kind of add up to a point, right? And I'll just stop here in the uncanny valley. When a person is at the point of being rejected for seemingly their vocabulary alone, they're forgetting that there are so many other traits about them that place them in the uncanny valley, where they're close enough to an holistic person, but not quite there. And just like with realism in art and media, this is very, very upsetting to most people. It is the something off about you that they just can't place. And as you know, in many situations, this is something that is very tough for people to tolerate. And usually they make things up in order to compensate for the lack of knowledge. This uncanny valley is also where movie monsters are designed to be. And that's why it's terrifying to people. They are scared of those types and they do not want to let them in. They recognize that the monster might be trying to fit in with people. They know this can happen, and that is terrifying. If you want to engage with allistic people from the beginning, you have to be tolerable here in order to really blend in this part if they allow you in at all. You present a social threat to them. You are not allowed to advance socially. You're not allowed to be the monster that blends in with society because that's a threat to them. And if it's not the words you use, your vocabulary, that threatens them, it's going to be something else. And the really difficult part, I think, for most neurodivergents is they always meet people on this side of the graph. And this line right here is a very, very hard barrier to cross. Most of the time, you will not be allowed to cross it. Now, it shouldn't be your life objective to be here because it's not like a noble thing to pursue, but it is a comfortable place to be, and you should accept it when you're there. My greatest success has always been when I've been found tolerable or high masking to a group of people, so that when they introduce me to unfamiliars, they start assuming me from here on forward. And that's where I don't present as much a threat to allistic people as other neurodivergents might. Another powerful thing to realize is that neurotypicals will change their acceptance of a group of people with greater prevalence in their environment. So, like in academia, you are forced to tolerate all of these people that aren't high masking. They're in the tolerable / uncanny valley zone, but they're all your professors and everybody else has all the little geniuses, right? That becomes normal to them, and the level of acceptance for people in this band will go up in such environments. When there's more of you around, that is social proof. That is proof that you can be higher on the social ladder, and they reluctantly or instinctually accept you more. That also means you'll find yourself more accepted in places that don't filter out neurodivergence. My personal stance on using advanced and uncommon vocabulary is I really don't like it. It makes me particularly a less effective communicator, and overall it is a barrier to communication on multiple fronts, not exclusive to the neurodivergent neurotypical divide. Anyway, I hope you find this analysis useful. I'm a moose. Goodbye.
I just learned that autistic people perceive a large vocabulary as condescension from autistic people. And it's like, you want to know what condescension from an autistic person actually sounds like? It's this: you can't handle synonym? Are you for real? I use the word wherewithal, and you incorrectly assume that that means I'm placing myself here in the pecking order and you are down here. Open up a thesaurus.
I feel like her video presented a perfect opportunity to offer some understanding and to talk about register. No, not cash register, but like linguistic register. And the linguistic register is just the level that we change to when we speak or write based on who we're talking to or the situation we're in. First, we have the formal register. This is the one that we use for professional, official, or serious situations. Good morning. I would like to inquire about the status of my application. Next, we have standard register or neutral. We use this just every day with strangers. It's just polite and it's less formal. Hi, can you tell me if my application has been processed yet? Next, we have the informal register. This one is a lot more casual and we use it with family and friends. So what's up with my application? Next, we have the frozen register, and this is language that we use in ceremonial ways. They're fixed sayings and they don't change. Even if it's an older version of the language, we still use it today. I hereby declare, I pledge allegiance, till death do us part. On your mark, get set, go. We also have the consultative register, and this is kind of like the language you hear between a doctor and patient or a teacher and a student. Let me explain the next steps for your treatment. And last, we have the intimate register, and this is private language that we use with the people who are the closest to us. Love you. See you later. Now, as we move throughout the day, we bounce from register to register all day long, and being able to do so relies heavily on understanding social context. Things like body language and tone and unspoken expectations, all those things signal when it's time to change registers, and a lot of neurodivergent people are not able to pick up on those clues. Also, many autistic people prefer very direct communication, and it can come off as blunt if you are using that kind of communication in a register where that kind of language is not expected. So, referencing the original Stitch, if you're using higher vocabulary in a register where that's not expected, it can come off as condescending even if you don't mean it to be. But I also understand that you are using that bigger vocabulary not to show off or put yourself on a higher level. You are using bigger vocabulary because it means exactly what it means. It's precise. So I think that even being aware that there are registers can kind of help us navigate this social jungle, because it's crazy out here. Like, even seeing them in those blocks like I colored them kind of even help me, discern what levels people are talking in, because sometimes it's just not clear. I told you I'm bad with nuance.
I wish I could form my own country or my own state just with the neurodivergent people of the
Hey Forrest, friend, nice to meet you. Listen, TikTok has every neurodivergent convinced that they have this special ability to, not care about like frivolous things and be more thoughtful and more open about the world in general. But I'm sorry, that's not exactly the case. Some hours ago, I made this graph. Basically, this is from the perspective of neurotypicals, your social acceptance and your authority to move up the social ladder, and your capability to mask. Most neurodivergents fit somewhere here. The ones that succeed better amongst neurotypicals are either high in masking or in the tolerable region. I used Sheldon as an example, so the Sheldon region. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because neurotypicals do this to each other too. All right, they just don't have to worry about figuring out the social cues as much, but they do have to figure out new cultures, new workplaces, that sort of thing. But neurodivergents will also do this to each other, and they will also place people in these categories, such as weirdo, where you feel like you struggle the most. Yes, there's a large percentage of neurodivergents that don't really place people here. They'll just accept them for who they are, okay? But there are also enough that will still do this, okay? Especially the ones that are high masking, maybe have a little bit of an ego about themselves, maybe feel like now that they're in a position where they're among the neurotypicals that they need to act like them thoroughly, okay? They will also place people in the weirdo category, all right? And what happens when you're in the bottom of the acceptance ladder? You don't get to progress socially, professionally, whatever. We also talk a lot about neurodivergents having superpowers. I've done it too, right? Where like the thinking out of the box was really helpful 20,000 years ago. And there were nothing like doom piles to worry about losing one of your like 6 lifetime items, right? It's not as much of a detriment. However, there are plenty of neurodivergents that are here, okay? They're clearly something else. When you go in this direction, this is where the people that need assisted living situations, all right, and heavy medication in order to be barely functional end up, okay? Your neurodivergent nation will include all the people that are capable of doing this, with the people that pull up the ladder behind them, and also the people that are not so thoughtful and not so, caring about lofty subjects. I don't know. And important to remember is this isn't a victim valley, okay? There are people here that don't deserve to be in low social acceptance, but there are also people in here who should not be making decisions and should not have clout, okay? You don't have to go seeking the neurotypical's approval to have a fulfilling life, but it really, really helps grease the skids when you get yourself out of this valley in the perception of others, no matter who is perceiving you. But I will indulge in your fantasy a little bit, because it would be wonderful to be like the social norm. I know there's places in the world that exist like that, but can you imagine the entire world like that? And some of the more malicious neurotypicals having to deal with the same stuff they enforce against others. Ooh, that would be great. Anyway, exactly. And there's power in getting yourself out of this well, not just for yourself, but to help others like us, okay? My last unit, I had instructor duty, okay? I was at the point where most people saw me here, okay? Some here. Very, very few here, but guess what? Those are not very well respected people. So, yeah, I was seen favorably, okay? But students showed up, and students would be in this range, a couple of them, right? They were good at what they did. They followed the rules. They were tactically proficient, by the book, fit, all the things that you value in military service and in the job that I had. But because they were here, everything they did was interpreted negatively by the neurotypicals, okay? I was in a position to help pull them out of this well so that their grades could improve. because they were performing the exact same as neurotypicals, but were getting hit on nonsense like briefing etiquette and professionalism. And because I was here, everybody saw me as a valid authority to be able to lead these students. And so those students trusted me when I said, hey, you got to do some work to get yourself out of here too. And they did. And now they're going on to be successful at the job I once had. And I know this because I hear from their peers. Anyway, goodbye. This is called a thought-stopping statement, and I will not stand for it, okay? This is not a pride graph. Don't think of this in terms of maintaining your personal pride, okay? This is a tool to get yourself out of dumb situations, okay? As I said before, I was in a military unit where the entire group of officers saw me here. Okay? Accordingly, they hated my guts. They tried to kill my career. But because other officers in my community saw me here and here, when the guys that put me here tried to kill my career, the people that saw me this way came to save my ass. And they did the best they could. And by the time I was on my way out, I had a job offer for a $300,000 a year job. Okay? And I didn't take that job because my earning potential and benefits are going to be way more where I'm at. So who's feeling used right now? Because I certainly don't. And by the way, neurotypicals have to do this too. They could be assessed here as well. They just don't have to do the social side of it as strongly, okay? But they still have to deal with cultural differences, work expectations, that sort of thing, all right? So this still happens. We just have one additional layer, some of these efforts to put into social integration and professional integration. This is why a lot of my posts are geared towards wealth, because the only people that aren't being used are like the most wealthy, and even they have to bow to somebody. Let's get away from the thought-stopping statements and use the tools to get yourself into better situations. Okay? I'm here to be real with you guys, so please don't take offense to this. This kind of messaging is social signaling. It is a form of masking. Typically, people who signal this sort of thing aren't very good at masking other parts of themselves, and very often they are going to end up here from the perspective of neurotypicals. Okay? We're misunderstanding this graph. This isn't an intelligence graph. It's not a coolness graph. It's nothing like that. It's literally an outside view, depending on your capability to mask for an environment where you're going to fall. These lines, these thresholds, they can change depending on who you're interacting with, what organization you may be a part of, circumstances of the day. It's all variable, okay? You go back this direction, okay? There's kind of a break here. This chart can keep on going, and it might get complicated. But this side of the graph is where you get to people that are incapable of even knowing what masking is. And to get to that point, right, at the very end, it's the people that are needing things like assisted living and heavy medication simply to get through life, okay? That's why this is the pity zone, okay? When you hear, like, you see a video of some autistic person who clearly needs family help, right? And has little independence, and you see all those comments, oh, they're so beautiful, oh, what a kind soul in there. Yeah, those are pity reactions, okay? Especially when it comes from a neurotypical holistic person, okay? This isn't a graph to feel pride or shame about. It's just literally where you are being evaluated based on your ability and willingness to mask. And again, this statement indicates a willing to mask. It's not a very well-informed way of being if you're trying to do it. But again, it's an indication that there is an attempt there. Maybe not for some aspects of life, but in others, definitely. I'm sorry if that comes across as harsh, but it's just how I assess things to be based on my life experience. And it could be different for you guys. But yeah, Feel free to ask questions and comment, and I'll incorporate this into some more. So you want to succeed in neurotypical places, but you find yourself in this category. How do you get out? We are going to talk about that right now. I will caveat all of this with I learned how to get out of this way too late in my military career to help me keep it in the long run. And I needed allies here that kept my career afloat, allowed me to continue doing operational work and go on deployment and that sort of thing. It's important to note here that this curve can be a cultural average among a group of people, but individual cultures or individual people can have varying intensities to each part of the curve. I haven't really seen it flipped where people prefer these guys. And if you're ever wondering, you're probably here instead of here if you're feeling social acceptance. My best allies in keeping my career afloat were all over here, and they perceived me as either here or here because I brought some unique things to my job. This means you, having the goal of succeeding amongst neurotypicals, needs to figure out where each person sees you on this graph and which way you need to go if you're stuck in the weirdo zone, right? So you can choose to go more high masking with certain types, or you can choose to go more into the tolerable region. In my career, many things are valued, but your ability to instruct and your overall level of knowledge and your ability to pull that real time is extremely valuable. One of the paths I had to, again, saving my career was an ally over here, a commanding officer of mine, called me a tactical savant. He didn't see me as high masking. He saw me as very tolerable because I knew a ton about my job. And I was also really good at making products that made people's lives easier and coming up with briefing and debriefing options that even the expert types were like, holy shit, I never thought of this before. So with those types, I went there. I made myself indispensable in a lot of ways, and I brought a lot of value to the unit that wasn't recognized by the people that never let me out of here. You have to identify those same strengths in your organizations if you want to succeed. If you can manage to convince people to cut down meetings while maintaining the same effectiveness, if you can be really, really good at making sales or getting the data that helps other people make sales, that's one way to just kind of like let your autistic whatever flag fly, and use your ability to make connections out of the people who can't. Right? They'll know something off is happening, but they'll let you there. With other people, I went towards high masking, and the way you get here, and this is tough. And you might be thinking like, why should I change my ways for them? And well, they're thinking, why should they change their ways for you? You're at an impasse, but generally speaking, you're going to be not in the position of power, and you want to gain some sort of power because this is comfort. This makes your life easier, right? For high masking, we're going to introduce another concept. Try it the neurotypical way. What does this mean? You're going to be behind on years of practice, but you are not going to ask clarifying questions. The way neurotypicals succeed in the neurotypical way is they do it the way they assume they should do it, the way they think things are implied, and then they get the feedback. And then they get lucky if it works for them. So you're going to try it their way. And typically, this starts with receiving an order. Now, when you receive an order, don't try to avoid looking puzzled or confused or whatever. And remember, an order is still a social event, right? Solidifying their place. Now, are you going to ask clarifying questions? It's going to be hard for you guys. You're not. You're not going to ask clarifying questions. They don't want that. That knocks them down. That makes you a social threat to them. You are defying the seniority in the interaction when you do that. So how are we going to do what they say? We're just going to leave the event and we're going to do the task. First thing, you're going to use your best instinct. Presumably you have a job, you have training, you have instruction, you have experience doing the job. Just do it the best way you know how. If you're going to solicit help, find people individually, not necessarily the person who gave you the order, and figure it out that way. But don't go to that person directly. Also, don't lean on other people for clarifying questions either. You're literally just looking for a couple details. The next thing, don't give them reasons to pick you apart. This is general purpose stuff. So when assigned a timeline, be on time, no excuses. If not, be early. Next, it's got to be properly formatted with no errors. Submit it through proper channels, proper products. And then last, somebody should immediately recognize the utility of your product. And then at some point, you're going to get feedback. And again, this is another social event. It's not just data. Neurotypicals hate being interrupted with questions. They loathe it. They do want to be asked, so wait for an invitation, an obvious break in the action, or at the end of the feedback. But they do want questions, so you do need to ask a few. You can prepare these ahead of time. Make sure you do not challenge social order in asking. When you take the feedback, make sure that you do it with humility. You may have to mask heavily for this one. Yep, I absolutely shortchanged that section. I'll add another 3 pages on koala bear fuzziness. Now, in an interaction with that, you are going to be left with some big points. Correct those. That's the social order portion of this. They don't want you to go nitnoid into all these random little details. They want you to address their concerns because that makes them feel socially in the right place. They will let it be known kind of the biggest points of emphasis that they want. The rest will be implied. Don't go digging. You'll have to learn that through your organizational practices. Digging for these means you have not accepted the social order of your organization. By covering the superior's biggest points of emphasis, you fit into the social order really well, and then you do everything else on your best instincts. If they're not going to like it, they'll never like it. It'll be because of who you are and not what you did. So really don't sweat it. That being said, don't forget that a product you make or something you do is typically seen by a lot of people, so law of averages applies. Now, with specific individuals, thank them for their feedback. I appreciate you talking to me today. I'll have the revisions in on time. Especially when being taught something, one phrase I've heard very successful subordinates become leaders habitually say is, "Thanks, I learned a lot." And in doing so, here's what you just accomplished. Your social order bar, you increased your masking. So whereas in the original graph, you found yourself here in weirdo territory, now you're pushing your rating this way, and you are arriving in the high masking, depending on how well you did, the clearly allistic territory. This may sound stressful to you, but with practice, it gets so much easier. And remember, this is a bit of an exaggeration. With the people that find you here, you're not getting as far as I led you to believe, all right? You're getting yourself in the tolerable zones again, right? But now you have the word, you have the reputation with people who evaluated you here, and then when you move along, and in the military people talk, right? But in other companies, that's with like phone calls or references and all that sort of stuff, you can start in other companies or in other organizations here now, or even here. And when I left the military, thanks to references and thanks to lessons I learned, when I moved over to my civilian job, they saw me here immediately. And that's all because I recognized that apparent performance and objective evaluations always include a social evaluation as well. They always include that. So if you can make people feel like they are succeeding in their own social order, then you will also be evaluated better on the objective measures. What do I know? Hundreds of moves. Yes, friend. Come in. I make special posts for you. 40% off. Come on. This here is a non-comprehensive list of ways everybody masks, and it's Very, very simplified and obviously small in number. You're doing hundreds of these little activities here. So I drew this up to help illustrate the point, okay? And this is not comprehensive as well. This is just one factor on how people evaluate you. Anybody, not just neurotypicals, but neurodivergents as well. And these are some of the components that go into that, all right? Real life is much more fluid, and any one of these factors can very often influence another category, if you will. You'll notice that when you're among any culture, these little categories, jargon used, that can also be slang, things like social hierarchy, gender role appearance, that sort of thing, when they get standardized in a culture, we typically call that a stereotype, but more correctly and more fair to the people, it's a trope, just like movie tropes. And a trope for neurotypicals is that when they notice these things in their environment, they immediately start to absorb them and make them their own habits. They don't need to work at it as much. Like the proliferation of jargon, right, through TikTok and other social media. The jargon economy is fast, right? You see somebody come up with a slang word, they pulled it from the Black community typically, and it seems like within a week, everybody's saying it on the internet, and it's not even days later that it's trickled out to the real world. People who don't even interact with popular culture outside the internet start using this slang, right? And this is where you notice you might be doing this too, okay? But a trope for neurodivergence is specificity. You want these things clearly outlined for you so that you understand the expectations. Here's the rough draft where expectations is at the center, right? Communication would kind of point towards that. You want that spelled out, and then you need to internalize and accept those before you start doing them yourself. All right. And again, everything's on a spectrum, right? Some of these you still subconsciously absorb. Some of them you have to go through the process to make part of yourself, at least for the interaction with a specific group of people. Now, when a cultural in-group is communicating, and neurodivergents do this too once they establish themselves as in-group, okay? All of this is pretty automatic, and they become like these subconscious expectations. So when somebody tries to communicate something verbally, all right, or in a written report, let's say, in a social situation, in a professional situation, okay, they don't have to define all the jargon, okay? They've got brevity to describe things that everyone will just assume. That's the implications part of this, okay? Same thing with like the hierarchy, right? You see deference to hierarchy. In-group people do not have to explicitly talk about this. It's part of all of the assumptions, all right? Same thing with the recognition. So when in-group people communicate, the implications of all of this go into their language. They don't have to specify. When out-group people communicate, and then especially when neurodivergents are involved, they feel like this isn't enough. They have to specify every little thing, every little detail in their communication with others. All right? That's pretty hard not to do. So then, when you start figuring out how to become a part of these organizations, you start getting vague, right? And really, to you, it's vague. To them, it's communicating with implications and assumptions and context, okay? For you, it feels vague, like you're omitting these. That's what I mean by tactical vagueness. You feel like you are dropping these little things out of your communication. You feel like you're being vague. That's tough to do. That's what masking is, right? Something unnatural to you. Neurotypicals have to do this too, but it's a much less conscious process because it's kind of like the way they process the world and the way they communicate in general. And yes, they accept the lack of detail because they feel like the broader context of all of these little factors and more is enough. And if they get it wrong, they get their feedback. That feedback is vague. They try again next time. So if it's sounding to you now like success in an organization is like luck, like you got to be lucky to take the corrective actions and lucky to get the feedback you need. Yeah, it's a lot of these people are probably succeeding on luck, but they do have a benefit of a lifetime trial and error process that neurodivergents typically don't want to engage with. But anyway, I hope this helps.
Always was confusing to me when someone would always say, "You always think you're right."
Hey, Forrest friend, I made these infographics to explain what you are kind of confused about.
What I don't understand about that is, doesn't everybody think that they're correct? If you are saying something and you are making a point, or you are making an argument, or just stating facts, why would you think that you're wrong?
When you're in any social circle, you are combating acceptance, okay? With neurotypicals and neurodivergence, a neurodivergent does this with masking, but there are so many other factors that go into it that tie into communication. The personality you have issue with isn't just complaining about the quality of your message. They're complaining about your lack of deference to a hierarchy. By saying you always think you're right, they're trying to knock you down a peg in acceptance. You have to realize that when people are in groups, okay, a natural hierarchy forms. That could be socially, professionally, whatever, okay? And the person at the top of this hierarchy is typically the most correct. Exceptions happen when you hand off the discussion to a subject matter expert, like your friend who knows the best pizza in town, okay? In that moment, that person can be at the top of the hierarchy. You've handed the keys of communication and messaging to him, all right? But as soon as that's over, the leader of the group, in this example, a social one, all right, takes over again, and everyone defers to the hierarchy. They have deference to it. They recognize it, and they have deference to it, and they let the leader, the guy with the highest acceptance, all right, run the show. Let's use an example of a hierarchy, all right? This could be social, professional, it doesn't matter. At the top are the people that have the highest ranking there. They're the ones that everybody wants to be friends with, wants a koto with. They might be your bosses, managers, whatever, okay? As we go, this is like the core group of people that, it's kind of like a bell curve, all right? And then here are like the outcasts, the runts, the he's an asshole, but he's our asshole friend. And then these are basically the outsiders, okay? Deference goes to the top. These people will have the highest decision-making authority when this entire group is together, all right? Notice what can happen when we isolate groups of people, all right? We've taken this group and we've isolated them into their own pod. When these four people are together, for whatever reason, this guy at the bottom of the overall hierarchy rises a little bit. Why? Maybe he's in a professional organization and he's down here because he's incompetent, but he's over here with these group of people because he's hilarious and they love him for it. Maybe this person is down here because where he works in an organization is in a blind spot to these people. They literally just care about the hierarchy and nothing else. He knows things that these people don't. He's put down there anytime he brings them up because they're blind to it. We see this a lot, right? But when he's working with his peers, okay, he brings value. And that's why he rises in the hierarchy. We can see these kind of shifts happen at the top as well, all right? I've seen this in military units where this person would be the commanding officer, this person would be the executive officer, this would be an operations officer, and this person would be like the natural leader of everybody else, all right? These people are really good at coming up with an idea. This guy is really good at executing it. When he's in a room with everybody, he's going to defer to these people. But everyone up here knows that when they're in a room alone, this guy runs the show. And so it really rubs people the wrong way when somebody down here in the group perceives something that they want to say or something they want to express as valuable up here, okay? And this is really frustrating, and this burns a lot of people in organizations, a lot of talented people, because they need their opinion to make it up here for it to be executed, but they're stuck down here. The only way it can go up is by deferring to the hierarchy in another sense. So they give this guy the idea. Then in this guy, he might have clout higher up at the top. All right. And then kind of the logical conclusion of all this is this person that's really good at executing gets that data to number 2 and 3, who can finally incept the idea into the person at the top. Every one of these people believes that they are right about what they do and what they believe in. Okay. But most of them are aware of this paradigm and know how to work it to get their ideas up. If you cut the line here, if you get your influence in the wrong group of people, okay, they're going to think that you are a know-it-all and they're going to cut you down. It's not anything to do with what specifically you said. It's the context in which you said it. Hope this helps. Yeah, I get that sentiment. And these models aren't perfect, right? They're just the best attempt at a valid analogy. You're supposed to, when you get data like this, you're supposed to think of it in the context of your own life and maybe add to it, maybe change it around, maybe come up with an entirely new model. That's what happens because we talk. So I'm speaking to the audience broadly here, not specifically to this commenter when I say the word you. If you're the type that keeps rejecting the conversation because it makes you uncomfortable or you feel personally attacked or it's not perfect to the situation, maybe your autism isn't the problem. I'm going to let that sink in for a second, because you can have all of your issues, right? But that doesn't prevent a personality that's tough to deal with, from overcoming anything else about you. Because just because you have autism doesn't mean the rest of your behaviors, or neurodivergence, doesn't mean the rest of your behaviors are valid for it. It's the same expectation out of neurotypicals too. So, harsh truth, but moose.
Giving holistic advice to autistic people. I could do a whole series on this.
A lot of difficulty between neurodivergent and neurotypical conversation has to do with taking things literally, and that neurodivergents can't accept that they shouldn't take things literally. But it's never explained very well how to fix that. All right. So here we've got our little communication card, and oh man, it's blinding here, right? We've got it's kind of tough to understand how to communicate with these people, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take our social filter. Okay. We're going to take that social filter. We are going to put it on top of everything, and now it becomes clearer a little bit what's being expected. This is a non-comprehensive chart to illustrate my point about how communication, effective communication, depends on all of these factors and more. All right. And this is very fluid. Okay. For example, appearance and demonstrating rank in appearance. You can also demonstrate rank in your hierarchy, rank through your use of jargon, rank through your, performance assessments, that sort of thing. All right. We're going to put our social filter over all of these. All right. But Moose, how am I supposed to do that? I've already been having so much trouble. Well, use your experience on TikTok so far. Jargon is a great place to start. A lot of people learn their slang through TikTok and other social media, right? But jargon also happens in the neurodivergent spaces. You see a lot of creators using that. When they branch out to political content, they use political jargon. And all of a sudden, everybody starts using it. You might have noticed, yourself included. Some of it's not very well defined. Some of you guys use it wrong, depending on the context, and get checked by other creators that have maybe more clout. Where does clout come in? Performance, hierarchy, okay? You recognize that there's clout on this app, and you recognize your place in it, typically. Why do some people habitually get a pass on the rules and you don't? Normalization of deviance. Why does Tyler Cassidy, aka Froggy Fresh, get to sing his song? Right? You recognize that. So use the lessons learned from your own community to understand another community. People do that with language too. Multilingual people reference the languages they know and the lessons they learn from learning language to learn other languages. Okay? This goes for going across cultures and all this other stuff. So the social filter is very important. How do you use it? You recognize this, that the information you present when you communicate is less important than the social message you are communicating as well. So how do you communicate a social message? Well, it starts with recognizing social hierarchy, these two parts, okay? You don't have to recognize a person's individual place in it. That gets uncomfortable for people to do. Hey, you're really popular, so I want to get a word from you, okay? It's just knowing that it exists in the first place and knowing that everybody's communicating in reference to this is a big start. If you feel like your neurodivergence allows you to pick up on things like micro movements and all this other stuff, whatever you want to call it, that you can assess these things, cool. Consider that a superpower of yours and use that to adjust your social filter, okay? Now, the rules aren't hard and fast, and context is very important here. But as a general consideration, when somebody solicits feedback, this is a good place to start. Somebody solicits feedback on objective measures, you're going to dial back the significance of the straight facts, and you're going to dial up the significance of social signaling. And this is partly what they are asking when they ask for objective feedback. All right? If they're asking you for something like a grade, like on a test, let's say they give you a written essay test, for example. All right? And you go in all of your objective measures and you grade it at an 85%, right? That 85% to you communicates 85% of your criteria for success being met. That 85% to a neurotypical communicates that socially there is some kind of bias in one direction. If they felt like their paper was worth a 90 and you give them an 85%, they think you like them less. That, or they think the culture they're in values them less. Conversely, they'll do that to you. Not just neurotypicals, by the way. Neurodivergents will do this to you as well. Everybody's capable of it. Hey, how do I look today? Maybe somebody's asking about their makeup, right? You look like a dude. To a neurodivergent, at least one that claims to take things totally literally, that could just mean, yeah, I didn't put on any makeup today, right? To a neurotypical, that might mean like, hey, your makeup is really, really messed up. And it is going to appear very socially. It's going to be a faux pas when you show up in public like that. This starts getting insidious when you get evaluated on like totally objective measures. For example, you win a race, right? Your lap time was like 4 minutes flat on a racetrack, and the world record was 4 minutes and like 0.3 of a second. So you beat the world record. And when you see your coach for the first time after that, and you're wondering how you did, and he simply responds, you finished the race in 4 minutes flat. That's social signaling. Being presented with raw data instead of emotion tells you that even though you beat the world record, he doesn't see it fit. He doesn't see you fit the social hierarchy of whatever institution you're a part of, maybe your qualification. Doesn't see it fit for you to celebrate. Conversely, your coach says, you crushed it, but let's say your raw data number fell short of the record. Your coach is communicating to you, literally, that you should feel good about yourself, because the literal part of this, they're openly communicating the social stuff, all right? Just not open to you. I want you to feel good about yourself in that moment, even though the raw data says that you did not win a record. Where this trips up a lot of people is especially in work feedback. You get feedback saying that you're not a professional, and you're like, what do you mean I'm not a professional? My uniform is immaculately put together. I come to work perfectly groomed every day with a fresh haircut every week. I show up exactly on time at the latest, but habitually 15 minutes early. I'm the last person to leave the workplace. I put out the products that go in front of all the management, blah, 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 blah. But you're still being told you're unprofessional. They're communicating literally. They're communicating raw data that your social favorability is low in the organization. So yeah, it took 7 minutes, 30 seconds to get here. You can take them literally when you apply the social filter, okay? Put that filter over all the language, context dependent. Everything's always context dependent, but you put that social filter over the language and you'll start to see what they're communicating much more clearly. All right, Moose. Yes, it does. And let's say you start with a friend group where everybody perceives each other to be on equal footing, like pure equality in terms of a hierarchy. All right. Eventually, after you guys do some things, behaviors will break out that the group favors, and it could be each individual. So let's say, dude on the left here, right, is our pizza place guy from the last example. So when it's time to go get pizza, he rises in the hierarchy. Okay? If only for that moment, you all toss the keys to him and listen to him because you're all deciding we're going to get pizza. This is the guy you all trust to do that, right? Now, let's say that you guys are going to go out to eat more and more and more. And turns out, dude number one is really good at choosing restaurants. So you start deferring the decision more and more to him. Now this dude solidifies himself in the hierarchy a little bit higher, right? He's demonstrated a lot more trustworthiness. But life is complicated, and so is your friend group. And as good as he is at selecting restaurants, he's a little bit flaky, all right? The person who's really good at getting the band together and actually making the outing happen is this person, all right? So now there's a little bit of a shift. This person is kind of like the life of the group. It's like everyone will get together, individuals might get together, but this is the one who makes it happen the most often and is the most reliable at being there, shows up. So this person emerges as a natural leader to the friend group. You can also start to see that this is a very fluid experience, especially with smaller groups of people, as individuals kind of like bring out their own personalities and add value to the group. And ultimately what happens is you'll very often see like a core group maybe break out and one person becomes more isolated, or another person kind of breaks off into another group. But the core group kind of like exchanges this hierarchy kind of on a regular basis. And notice this hierarchy shift can happen even with purely positive behaviors. Like nobody has to be a bad friend in order for one person to gain more clout within the group, right? And have the consistently better ideas or have the consistently higher reliability in getting everybody together. But to kind of further illustrate my point, if you remember from this diagram, we have an outsider band, right? Where they don't belong in the hierarchy at all, right? And so when these people are around, they are assumed to be either lower or somewhere else in the hierarchy until they are brought in and evaluated. The Schrodinger's, participant, if you will. And how this manifests in friend groups is that, hey, this is our original group of 4 friends, but that might not be your only friend group, all right? These people are outsiders to them. They are outsiders to them. They don't even rank on a hierarchy yet, okay? But as you potentially introduce people from one group over to the other, then they're going to get sorted ultimately. And typically they're going to start kind of mid-range or at the similar value you bring to your group. And then they'll be evaluated accordingly and brought in or kind of excluded. All right. This also happens with breakouts, just like I demonstrated before. Okay. So again, if a smaller group within a larger one gets together to the exclusion of everybody else, it could just be happenstance, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing that it happens. All right, different rankings can break out. So let's say this also reflects the hierarchy of this group right here, and this is the natural leader in more situations than not. Then maybe when these two get together, right, this guy is the one who calls most of the shots. Like, hey, I prefer we go to this restaurant, they can control meeting times, that sort of things. And again, this isn't like hard and fast. It's literally just like kind of the nature of communication in general, where ultimately there's a consensus. And then the other thing with these hierarchies is they don't necessarily reflect any sort of reality. Each one of these is a perception of an individual. So if you were to ask each individual person within a friend group, one person might rate themselves at the top and everybody else equal beneath them. Another person might see themselves as a second hand man, the right hand man to the one on the top.
This other person might assume that there's a, 2 layers, and another can have the order completely reversed. And honestly, none of these and all of these are true when tested. All right. It's just kind of how leadership works in any group of people, but socially, sadly, you don't always have a choice. And another thing here is that these happen in all circles, to include neurodivergent circles. Hierarchies will break out. Now, neurodivergents process things a little bit differently, and I can show. And this isn't always a bad thing either. Like, a hierarchy can break out simply because one person provides the most fun in one given scenario. But yeah, neurodivergents, some of them do things a little bit differently, and they could see a friend group like this, all right? Or a professional group like this. And we've heard it before, the sentiment that the most important person is the one that has the best thing to offer in any given moment, all right? So in the example of our, restaurant choosing friend, right? This person's the best at choosing a restaurant. When the conversation comes up, the group may thrust him into the top of the hierarchy, all right? But when concept or, love and relationships come up, maybe this person has the best thing to say, all right? When you have to solve a math problem, I don't know, I'm just making things up at this point, right? Maybe this is the person that everybody defers to. The thing is, these exist. TikTok wants to make people think, or the community on TikTok wants to make people think that there's a large victimization happening, or that hierarchies are inherently terrible, right? And that any recognition of one person providing more value than another is is evil. I don't know, right? But these things break out. You don't have to enjoy it, all right? But we all do this. Every single person does this. This is human nature. Sometimes the people over here deserve to be over there, no matter neurodivergent or neurotypical. Sometimes the people over here deserve to be here, whether neurodivergent or neurotypical. Sometimes hierarchies can be flat, where even though it looks like these people are at the bottom, a very distinct bottom of social order, right? They are still more or less equals, and they have a good amount of influence. It's just metered compared to everybody else. In professional organizations, these are often the new people, not necessarily that they're bad. They just don't have the experience yet to make the decisions that these people know how to make because they have knowledge. They don't, simply because of time in the organization. The thing I'm trying to communicate to the neurodivergents here is that if you are stuck here in this valley, all right, you are more likely to be placed here. And in order to get out, right, somebody else has to see you in one of these two ways in order to place you higher in the hierarchy. That can just happen by having more neurodivergence in a space. In a previous video, I explained that the more neurodivergence there are in a place, the less any individual one of them has to mask. This curve essentially flattens out, and the masking becomes more of the community expectation, not necessarily the intangible social differences that we have. But again, this all goes in a communication, and all of these little categories and more that it's too much to write, they also determine, how well you fit into a social group, okay? And it's not always your neurodivergence that's the problem, okay? That the neurodivergence, particularly prominent on TikTok, are worried about the hierarchy aspect of things. That's the thing they struggle with the most, okay? On a professional side of things, none of this stops you from actually being good at your job, meeting the appearance expectations of an organization, adopting the language, okay? On the social side of things, right? None of this means that you can't be the one getting gatherings together, all right? You can put gatherings together and be the reliable person that does that and then take a back seat when they start and just chill, okay? None of these stop you from, meeting the trope of your friend group, all right? Like if you dress like an emo amongst a bunch of cowboys, okay, cool. It's not your neurodivergence to doing it. Maybe you're just not part of the subculture, okay? Like the language as well, your willingness to use slang. nothing stops a neurodivergent from using slang. You know, maybe they'll change a little bit, but go across the app. Everyone's doing it. So my argument here is intuitively, we all understand, everybody, even the neurodivergents understand that these hierarchies exist. Okay. I think the bigger problem is not recognizing that it's not just a neurotypical thing. It's not. It's a human thing. All right. You just interpret it differently. Okay. You interpret things more like this example, right? Or more people interpret it like this. But even then, reality is shaky. It's variable, you know, and a lot of neurodivergents will still see situations like this. Okay. Just depends on the group you're a part of. That's all.